And AI has been all in the news about movies and music. Drake recently had to take down a song because he had AI Tupac on it.
Right.
So mostly I think AI has been presented as this sort of boogeyman.
Welcome back to Get to the Hook. We are back for another week of just interesting musical facts related to something going on in the world of music right now. I am your co-host, Charles Latibeaudiere.
And I'm your other co-host, Eric Colley.
All right, and let's get to the hook, as they say. And this week, leading off is Randy Travis in a very unique way.
Yeah, we are talking about songs that were technically innovative, that changed everything. And of course, top of mind is 65-year-old Randy Travis.
Yeah, which you wouldn't think that he would be, but listen, 65 years old. And we should say, for those who don't know, that Randy Travis suffered a severely debilitating stroke, 10, almost
2013,
10
11 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. But he is still sharp enough to be writing songs, and now has his biggest hit in
20 years. And before we play the soundbite, I want to explain this song, and this is the bigger conversation we're having.
Right.
It's AI. And AI has been all in the news about movies and music. Drake recently had to take down a song because he had AI Tupac on it.
Right.
So mostly I think AI has been presented as this sort of boogeyman.
And by the way, there have been a lot of songs that were produced by nobody really knows who, where they used AI versions of popular artists.
A lot of Michael Jackson,
Yes.
a lot of Frank Sinatra songs, and like current art, Drake, The Weeknd. So mostly I think people have seen this as a bad thing, but with anything in technology, particularly in music, we see people fight against it, but there's just no stopping something once it's happened. I think there's no stopping AI. And Randy Travis and Warner Music Nashville, his record label, have figured out how to use this for good. Because Randy, like you said, he's still mentally sharp, but he cannot sing the way he used to. And so he has a new song out, and I want to explain how they did this. So a lot of the AI that's on YouTube and stuff is amateurs, and we don't know how it's being made. And it's cool,
Sure.
but it sounds a little wonky sometimes.
Right.
So Randy and his producer took over 40 of his isolated vocal tracks from his master tapes, because they have those, and they created their own AI model. And then they have a singer named James Dupree who came in, and he has kind of a similar range to Randy. And Randy and the producer told him how to sing this song, like the inflection to use, how Randy would do it.
So he's doing sort of a Randy impersonation.
Kind of. Not his voice doesn't sound like him exactly, but they just like phrase it
They need
like
to get
this.
it close,
Yes,
right? The
sing
phrasing
how
close.
Randy sings it. And once they were happy with that, they applied this AI model. So this is the song. It's called Where That Came From. And bear in mind, this is not actually Randy Travis's voice you're hearing.
Out came the sun, and there ain't no more where that came from.
I mean, it sounds like you froze him in 1988 and thawed him out and got that.
Yeah, I mean, that is amazing. And they're applying, you say they put the AI model over it. It's basically like there's a filter. So they have the recording, and then they render it with this filter on it, this AI model, and it comes out sounding like that.
It sounds exactly like Randy Travis. And it has been now released as a Randy Travis. It's his new single. He is the credited artist. It's debuted at 45 on Country Airplay after its first week.
And you got to know that people in country music are going to embrace this. No one's going to, it's Randy Travis, who's beloved anyway, and so no one's going to say, hey, he shouldn't do that. Like, this is a case where, as you say, it's being used for good. So nobody's going to say, this is wrong, you shouldn't do this. They're going to embrace it, but it's a catch-22, because now, if then you're going to use the technology, then the technology's out there, and that is the slippery slope.
Right. And this is the example of it being good, because a lot of what we've seen with this, it's artists who have passed, because that's the novelty of hearing a deceased artist doing a new song. And the estates have been shutting this down. This one, Randy is still very much alive. This is the song he wanted to make. He just physically can't sing it like
Right, and he's involved in the production of this, so who's going to knock it?
And it's amazing for him to get to hear himself again.
It really is pretty awesome,
It's
actually.
very awesome.
When you think about like what you could do as long as the estate is on board with it and you know that it's AI, I think I'm okay with hearing some of these things.
It's gonna happen. I mean, people are fighting it now, but eventually, especially as we get decades and decades away from certain artists, everybody who knew them will be gone. And I don't think there will be
Yeah.
this like, what were their wishes? It'll be, hey, what if we could make, Michael Jackson and Bob Marley do a duet?
Right.
And if you can do that, if it's officially sanctioned, and if you have access to master recordings to really get the sound, it's going to happen, whether we like it or not. Eventually, like if someday the Elvis estate could be like, hey, here's a brand new Elvis record.
I guess the only time I would be against it is if we knew for certain that during their lifetime, this was something they didn't choose to do. They didn't want to. For instance, like the one I'm thinking of is like Prince and Michael Jackson.
Right.
They had plenty of opportunities to actually be in a studio and record something together, and they chose not to. And that's fine. It would be a little, that feels wrong to me,
Right.
just because we have the technology to like, hey, let's have them do a song. Like if both estates were on board with it, which you could kind of see them
You can
maybe doing down the
absolutely
line because there'd be so much money to be made from it.
It'd be an event record, like we talked about last week.
But that one feels wrong to me.
There's some that are wrong, and that's the problem with deceased artists. You never know if they really would have wanted to be part of this or not. Would Tupac want to be on a Drake record? I mean, there's no way of ever knowing that.
Drake
But-
will say yes, of course.
Of course, Drake would say yes.
But Kendrick Lamar would say hell no.
But also, it seems so blasphemous in one way, but also it can keep a lot of artists alive.
Yeah.
What if there could be a new Frank Sinatra record? And people would be interested. Like this Randy Travis song, had he not had his stroke, if he could still sing, and he put this new song out, would it get as much attention? It wouldn't.
Yeah,
It
it wouldn't.
wouldn't.
It just wouldn't. I mean,
At that point, he's an artist 40 years into his career.
Yeah.
There's not going to be that excitement. There's always that curiosity, and I think that's going to drive a lot of what people do going forward. So we're going to talk some other songs, and a lot of these benefited from that. So, I mean, a lot of them are great songs in their own right.
So now we're talking about songs that not necessarily
Not AI, no.
Not AI, but we wanted that to be, that's the jumping off point.
Right.
For what we're talking about here is that when technology sort of creeps in, whether that be a new sound, a new way of recording, how that's turned out over time.
So these aren't not influential songs in terms of like their songwriting or they were just such a huge hit or anything like that. These are songs that were unique in their day because they sounded like nothing anybody had ever heard before. They were influential in a technological point of view. Some of these, the things that they invented seem so obvious and basic now, but at a point they weren't. So we're going to go way back.
All right.
1950.
Okay.
Patty Page.
I'm a little uncomfortable, but all right.
Patty Page. right.
I mean, what part of the country are we in?
Whatever part you want to be in. Well, actually, no, specifically, this is about Tennessee. So,
okay.
no, 1950, Patty Page, one of the biggest singers in music at that time, and she released this song, The Tennessee Waltz, and I want to see if you can tell what is so significant about this.
I know the song, so I got to listen to this now.
Yeah, listen to this.
I was dancing with my darling to the Tennessee Waltz.
That her also doing the backup?
She is doing the both lead vocals. She harmonized with herself. It was one of the first multi-tracked vocals of the same artist.
Wow.
And people were like, in 1950, this was sci-fi futuristic.
yeah.
Like, wait, those two women are the same woman?
Which is something that is done so often now that
everything is multi-tracked.
Right.
It's actually rare to get actual backing singers anymore. You would just do your own voice if you're a singer. But nobody had ever heard or had the idea of, wait, the same singer could just record two different takes and put them together.
Right.
It was a new innovation.
That's crazy because I mean I heard it immediately and I was like, well, I mean, this could be a backup singer. I'm like, but it sounds so much like her, and that's great.
And
I did not know that about that.
Harmonized with herself, and eventually by the 70s, Freddie Mercury was creating choirs of his own vocal. Marvin Gaye did it. Prince did it. But yeah,
Mariah Carey then went on.
Mariah Carey
Yep.
is all of her own backing vocals. But that was a new idea because in the 30s and 40s, people recorded live straight to a master recording. Then they started having tape. I'm like, wait, we could record one track and then record another and play them together. And it was this wild revelation.
And both things, by the way, because I've listened to a lot of records where it is multi-track recorded, and you can tell that. And the best produced albums, it doesn't really jump out at you. But if you stop and you listen to each thing, you can be like, all right, I can see where they did that.
Yeah.
But I also love the charm of the old school way of just recording an album live. Like when there are albums where they do that and they make note of it that this was all recorded live, and it sounds so cool.
Yeah.
It sounds so cool.
There's an energy to it and a spontaneity to it. But it it also, having these multi-tracked vocals opened up so many avenues for people to create all these new sounds. You don't
Well,
have to pay a bunch of backing singers.
I'm going to mark that one down for my trivia books. Just that sounds like a question that might come up sometime in trivia. First song.
Extra fun trivia on that. For some random reason, it was the best-selling song ever in Japan until 1974. Why? I have no idea.
What?
Tennessee Waltz was the biggest selling song ever in Japan until 1974. So, all right.
Remember riding the subway in Tokyo, I'll just start singing out loud
Tennessee Waltz.
And be like, ooh.
Somebody will know it. Sticking in the 50s, because obviously a lot of innovations were happening in the 50s technologically. And this is another thing now. This is just a preset in GarageBand or on a guitar effects pedal. Flange. You know what that is?
Oh, yeah.
Or like a phasing effect.
Mhm.
And it's when, so you have a tape playing a few milliseconds at a time with itself, and it creates this like whooshy, like kind of sound.
Yeah.
You hear it all the time on stuff now. But in the 50s, they had to manually slide the tape a few milliseconds and record it that way. And so this song got to number 3 solely because of how weird it sounded. This is Miss Toni Fisher, The Big Hurt.
Waiting to hear footsteps that say.
We've all heard that effect
Oh,
a
yeah.
million times, but
Yeah.
in 1959, they were like, what is this from a
So-
UFO?
They actually would, so they'd record it, then they would splice the tape.
It gets
and
real
put-
technical, but I think, yeah, you have it when the channels are slightly out of sync.
Right.
It creates that sort of weird whooshy
Huh.
sound.
Wow.
But people like it.
That is literally just the thing you just, like you said, it's a preset and thing.
Yeah.
I think on my guitar amp, there's an actual dial you can turn up the flange sound.
But it's still, even into the 80s, you know, talk about Prince again. One of the things that was so unique about his songs, he used a Linn drum machine, which everybody in the 80s was using. That's the drum machine sound from the 80s is
Yeah.
the Linn drum machine. Prince had the idea of running his drum machine through his guitar effects pedal, and he put the flange effect on it. That's why when you hear When Doves Cry on Raspberry Beret,
Right.
it's that like sound. And people are like, what is this weird sound? Simple innovation. Simple innovation.
Yes.
In the 60s, a lot of innovation in the 60s. We're going to get to a couple things. When you think of rock music and you think of early 50s rock music, and then you think of what it became in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there were moments along the way where you can see, oh, somebody did something that other people weren't doing. 1964, you got the Beatles, you got the Stones, a lot of bluesy, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The Kinks of the British bands were one of the first hard rock groups, kind of. I mean, now if you hear the song, it doesn't sound like hard rock, but You Really Got Me. The way they did this, and this is something that Rocket 88, the very first rock and roll song, Jackie
Mhm.
Brenston, we talked about that on another episode. Partly why that song sounded the way it did was because the speaker in the amp was busted, and it gave it sort of an overdriven sound.
Right.
So the Kinks deliberately slashed the speaker with a razor and poked holes in it to get a heavy, distorted sound, and then played power chords, which nobody was doing. And then You Really Got Me sounded like this.
Girl, you really got me going. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing.
And it was like
That
one of the
is
first
so
hard rock
cool that
songs.
That's how they got that sound.
Yeah. And then you had, like, within a couple years of that, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Jimi Hendrix, a group called Blue Cheer did a cover of Summertime Blues that most people considered to be the first heavy metal song in 1968 because they were like, what is
Yeah.
this? And that was the dominant sound of rock for over a decade. And then we're going to go to the late 70s here for somebody who did the next evolution of hard rock, who ironically on this same album did a cover of You Really Got Me.
That's right. That's right.
But the innovation here was, what if when you're playing guitar, and you play guitar, you know this.
Yeah.
How did it take until the late 70s for someone to think, what if I tap my fingers on the strings? And the world was not ready for Eddie Van Halen and Eruption. So many of these songs, I wish I could have been either alive or old enough at the time to see people's reactions.
Yeah.
I can't imagine hearing that in 1978.
Now, I've seen a video of Les Paul doing finger tapping, but not in the way that Eddie Van Halen did it. So, yeah, I mean, I remember hearing that going over to my friend Carmine's house, and he put that record on, and we're like,
You're like, what is this?
what is happening?
Because
Like, how is he
nothing
doing
had
it?
ever sounded like that.
Yeah.
And then everything sounded like that for
Yeah.
a good 15 years. Every hair band was doing that horse winning
Yeah.
thing. They all wanted to do it. Also, we're jumping back to the 60s for a second, because I know we talk about the Beatles a lot on this podcast.
It's
I'm not
hard-
even like a huge Beatles fan.
Right. It's just hard to avoid them when you're talking about,
certain things.
great things in rock and roll.
Innovation. When you think of the late 60s, other than Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix, like what are the sounds that come to mind when you think of the late 60s?
The late 60s. I mean, Motown.
Yeah.
But
like in rock.
Led Zeppelin definitely was like early 70s, but
Yeah.
they were starting, and it was like blues.
But
I mean, it was sort of I don't want to say bastardization of blues, but taking
it was.
blues and then adding another layer to it.
What about psychedelic?
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
sitars and like
Sitars,
weird
yeah, I definitely
stuff.
think Cream.
So you think
that
early
kind of sound.
Beatles, like 64, like, She Loves You, Yeah, 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 and Can't Buy Me Love, and those fun songs. And then you think of late Beatles, and it's night and day. And one of the moments where you can draw a line and say, oh, here's where it changed, was an album cut from Revolver, the song Tomorrow Never Knows. Like, listen to this. So, John Lennon
Wow.
admitted that song was about doing LSD. So drugs do play a part there. There's no
Right.
denying that. But
It's
some
sort
of
of
the
an
things,
oral depiction of,
Yeah, it really
of
is.
LSD.
So some of the things that happened around that time, the Beatles had decided they weren't going to tour or weren't going to worry about trying to recreate songs live. So then it was just fully a studio
Sure.
creation. And people didn't really make songs in the studio like that at that point because you had to think about, how do
Yeah.
I play this live? They were like, we don't have to worry about that. So that song, some of the things, using the sitar drone on it, they used tape loops on it, which was a kind of a new idea, backwards effects, because nobody had ever thought when they were recording on tape, well,
That
what
you
if we
could
just
even
run it
play
backwards?
it backwards, right?
And then record it backwards on the song. And again, it seems so obvious now, but
Right.
somebody had to think of that. And that song had all that kind of stuff going on.
You know what I didn't think of when you asked the question about the late 60s and that sound? And here's a guy who did recreate a lot of this live on stage, is Jimi Hendrix.
Absolutely.
Although he did a lot of stuff in studio too, using recording effects. But
Right.
what he did live,
Well, the way he played guitar, it's that combination of the technological thing and the Eddie Van Halen thing of like, wait, people could have just been playing guitar like this all along.
right?
Just nobody had.
Right.
And so, and to
Someone
that
stumbles
point,
into it. Yeah.
playing something that nobody had ever played like that before. And it blows my mind. Drums have been around for a very long time, even like modern drum kits. Until the early 70s, nobody thought to do this pattern, and it transformed music, certainly for the rest of the 70s. Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, R&B group from Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
Teddy Pendergrass, lead singer, love Teddy Pendergrass. The drummer was a guy named Earl Young, who would go on to form the Tramps and record Disco
Okay.
Inferno. In 1973, their song "The Love I Lost" introduced the disco hi-hat. So, people call dance music oonce music.
Yeah.
Oonce, oonce, oonce.
It's that hi-hat.
That's where it
they're talking
started.
about.
It's-
Right.
And it's also something, it's called 4 on the floor, which there's 4 beats to a measure in a song, most
Yeah.
pop songs. And so disco songs, what he started doing there was, what if the kick drum, like the bass drum, hits on all 4 measures, like a thump, 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 thump. And then in between, he added that little
The
slightly
hi-hat.
open hi-hat that
Yep.
and changed dance
And that's
music.
it. And now,
And we
now
still
you got
do that.
disco. And it's still, yeah. And when you hear that sound now, you go like, sometimes it doesn't even sound like disco.
Yeah.
Just depending on what else is going on around it. But yeah, it's even Nirvana used it in some of their songs.
Yeah, every song uses that. And
Yeah.
it's amazing to me that until the early 70s, nobody hit a hi-hat and was like, "Tsk, oh, that's a cool sound."
And that's literally probably how it happens. Like
Yeah.
you're just sitting around in like rehearsals or something, or like someone makes a sound, you go like, wait a second, what was that?
Yeah, so
It's got to catch someone's ear.
that was just somebody figuring out a new way to play, and it caught on. Because disco was already starting to happen at that point a little bit. And one of the things disco did, obviously, was like a lot of strings and like lush sounds. Something else that was happening at the same time, the invention of synthesizers. They'd been around for a while, but people were learning how to use them in new ways. Now, this was, of all the examples on this list, a new instrument changing everything. So there were like a group called the Silver Apples in the 60s did synth music. The Moog synthesizer was a thing people played with, and it was a novelty. It's like, look at this weird sound we're making. And then groups started thinking, what if we could make whole songs out of this? Remember the German group Kraftwerk?
Uh-huh.
I'm just going to say Kraftwerk. I know it's not
No,
pronounced
it's
that way.
Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk. In 1975, it came out in 74, hit in 75. I imagine people were like, they didn't know what to make of this. Here's Autobahn.
Fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn. Wir fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn.
It sounds really simple now,
Yes.
but
In
like
fact, it almost sounds like way too simple. Like, why would that have caught on? But that sound
because
had never
nothing
been heard before.
like that. Like
right?
and like drum machines had been in Sly and the Family Stone's Family Affair. There'd been like those early, really basic drum machines, and then Kraftwerk started doing full compositions on synthesizers, and people were like, "Oh!" But now, to me, that song, like you said, you listen to it and it sounds kind of simple.
Yes.
I'm not saying this to be disrespectful to it. It was
Right.
trailblazing. Just 2 years after that, we could do a whole episode on this song.
We
I
really
think this
could.
is one of the most innovative, brilliant songs of all time.
Yes, definitely was a completely different sound. And at the time that I heard this song we're about to hear, I didn't know about Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
And so this was for me the first synthesizer driven song. Like
It's
it is not just driven by
no,
synthesizer.
it's like
the
going
whole
from like
song.
like Pong to like The Last of Us. You know, it's
Yeah.
like I don't know, I'm not a gamer, but this masterpiece, Donna Summer's "I Feel Love."
I remember at the time thinking that I don't know what a computer sounds like, but that sounded like, oh, if computers could actually make a sound, this is the sound they
Yeah,
would make.
and the only things on that song that are not a computer are her voice, which she did in one take, by the way, and the kick drum, because they couldn't get a really great kick drum sound.
Right.
But it was Giorgio Moroder, her producer, and Pete Bellotte, co-writer. The three of them made that song, and they did things with the synthesizer that the creator of it didn't know it could do. There was a guy, Robbie Weedle, he was an assistant engineer, realized when they were trying to do all these like weird pinging synth sounds, they were having a hard time keeping it in sync.
Right.
That all that kind of stuff. And he realized if we took a click track and put it on the tape, the synthesizer would auto lock onto it and it would keep everything in sequence. And Giorgio Moroder said, that's a game changer.
That guy's a genius.
Brilliant. And so then they create this whole song out of nothing but synth sounds. And it still sounds, when you listen to it on headphones or AirPods now, there's stuff pinging back and forth, left and right. There's still new sounds
I'm
to
gonna do
discover in
that.
that song.
I'm
It's
gonna
really
do that
cool.
tonight.
How's that 50 years old? Like it
Right.
sounds like it could come out right now. It's disco, it's house, it's rave, it's EDM, it's what Dua
It
Lipa's
totally-
doing right now.
Yeah, exactly. It totally could come out now. I for the longest time as a child, I just associated Giorgio Moroder's name with synthesizer. Like I thought he invented the synthesizer because I just remember I would always read the liner notes, and that song in particular, I heard it and I was like, wow, what is that? And I'm reading the liner, and his name stood out to me
Yeah.
because it was just a strange name. And I was like, oh, well, he must be the guy who invented synthesizers. Like, and that's, I thought
He didn't
that for
invent them,
years.
but he made them what they,
Yeah.
synth pop in the 80s became of what he was innovating. Even when Daft Punk did their Random Access Memories album, there's a song on the album called Giorgio by Moroder that's just 9 minutes of him talking about
Really?
his innovations and how brilliant he is. Not in a self-aggrandizing kind of way, just
Right.
if
Just
you're
them
Daft Punk,
acknowledging.
he's the guy that made your existence possible.
Yeah. The Godfather.
I remember the first time I remember hearing I Feel Love was like around 1990-ish. And I was like, oh, it's like a remix. It's
How
like a
did you not
modern
hear it
version.
until 1990?
Because it was
Did they not have disco in West Virginia?
It was dead. It was dead and
Oh,
buried.
you
I had
weren't
to
allowed, that's right. You weren't allowed to see. I grew up in New York where we embraced disco, but
Oh,
West
yeah,
Virginia,
no,
you're
it was
like, ooh.
Oh, when I got into disco when I was like 13, and it was not cool. it was still the disco sucks era. So no, I had to find that on my own. But just how brilliant and innovative that is, and that it still
Yeah.
sounds so fresh, almost 50 years later.
Yep.
Talking about technological innovations, you knew we had to talk about this song, and I'm sorry for putting
Of
this in your
course,
head
yes, we do, and it's gonna stick with us.
all day, maybe the rest of the week.
I got to listen to something else as soon as we get out of here.
Let's
But
just do it. Just pull the Band-Aid off. Share, believe.
So sad that you're leaving. Takes time to believe it.
But you remember the
I'm
first
trying
time
to
you heard
focus
that.
just on her voice there and
Yeah.
not the music because that's what's going to be the.
I didn't even
earworm.
play the "Do You Believe in Life After Love" part. I spared
Right.
you that because that's not autotune. But yeah, it's autotune, which had been
Autotune.
around for a while
Yeah.
by 1998 when she made that song. But the point of autotune was for nobody to know you were using it. It was supposed to very
Instead of-
subtly pitch correct and fix some flat notes.
Right.
And Mark Taylor, the producer of that song, was in the studio and just turned autotune to the extreme pitch correction setting, which nobody ever uses. and it sounded like that. He thought it was cool. And he said he was very, very nervous to play it for Cher. Like,
Yeah,
gonna be
because
offended.
as the vocalist, you would think, why are you doing that to my voice? Was there something wrong with my voice? Why are you completely changing it?
Right.
So I could totally understand and be like, hey, Cher,
Yeah,
want to hear
so
something?
This is funny, right? Funny jokes unless you
right.
like it. She loved it. And you know who didn't love it? Warner Brothers.
Oh, really?
The label was like, absolutely not. You're taking that off. And Cher said, if you take that off, we're not putting the song out. She's like, you have to keep that on.
Wow.
She was
The
right.
label didn't want to do it because I'm sure they're like, look, we signed Cher because we know that people love Cher and we want to hear Cher. We're not hearing Cher, so we're not doing this. No.
Yeah, and they thought it sounded maybe people would think she couldn't sing. Like, oh, look, they have to do all this trickery to her voice.
That is because honestly, that's what people think now when people use autotune. But I guess if you're Cher, you got to go like, obviously people know I can sing.
Yeah,
At that
she was
point, she'd
decades
been
into
doing
her
it.
career
Right.
at that point, right? It sounded cool, and you remember the first time you heard that, it's just like, oh, what was that? Because we had heard, so there was different things in the 70s and 80s. There was the talk box, which is like a tube that goes in your mouth. Peter Frampton,
yeah.
Living on a Prayer, the intro is a talk box.
Wow.
The vocoder.
I always wanted one of those.
The vocoder, Roger Troutman from Zapp used that. The song
Mhm.
California Love, people know that. That California Love. I can't sing that, but that's a vocoder. And it's kind of like what they did with Cher on Believe, but not exactly.
I didn't realize. So wait, the vocoder is different from the
talk
auto-tune?
box. And
Or from the talk
they're
box?
all
From the
three
talk
different
box.
things.
Yeah.
But then, of course, after Cher, it was a novelty when she did it because people thought, well, nobody's going to do that. People will think you can't sing. And that's exactly what happened to poor T-Pain. I mean, he made a
Yeah.
huge career. I mean, he redefined singing in the 2000s
Right.
and till today. T-Pain can really, really sing.
Well, that was such a revelation a few years ago, right? Like 10 years ago, people were like, wait a second, he can actually sing?
I remember he did that interview and he said that he was on a plane and Usher told him, you destroyed music for everybody. And
That's right, yeah.
and it really hurt his feelings. He was like, did I? No.
I don't know if he
it's-
did. It was just, it was an era. It was a thing.
It was a
and
thing.
Everyone
It's
was
still
into it.
around. But it was a tool, and any tool is what you make of it. And so that's what all these songs have. Some of them, they're mostly just remembered because of the novelty. But they did something that songs have continued to do because they were laying the groundwork for what was possible.
Yeah.
So now this Randy Travis song, like I said, you remember when pirating was happening in music in the late 90s, the labels fought that. And I understand that. They had a financial interest in that. But then even they fought digital downloads for a long time. And it took them forever to make a deal with iTunes and all the different platforms. They fought streaming for a long time. They always dig their heels in. And I understand in the moment why. But once these things happen, they are going to happen.
They're going to happen. And then,
All of them have been inevitable and changed the industry.
and what is also inevitable is that the industry finds a way to monetize it and to make sure that, all right, it's going to happen, but let's just make sure we get our cut.
Yeah, they'll make their money even if the artists don't. That's always
Yeah,
tale as old as time. So this AI thing, Randy Travis, it's sort of a novelty right now. We're at that stage of it where, hey, look, he's singing again. Cool.
Yeah.
10 years from now, who knows what we're going to be talking about?
A year from now,
Yeah,
there's going
you're
to
right.
be some
And I think-
huge case eventually that has to do with AI and music and using people's voices. And
And I think if this song of his becomes a really big hit, even just in the country market, the labels are going to notice that. And I do think it'll be really interesting years from now when you think about the, artificial intelligence revolution of music. Yeah. Randy Travis.
Randy Travis,
Innovator,
the
pioneer.
godfather of AI.
I hope so. Good for you, Randy Travis.
Yes, he
Good
should
to have you back.
be another feather in his cap.
That's right.
In an already storied career. That is going to do it for us this week on Get to the Hook. We will see you next week.